before I was actually, this talk was approved, the conference organizers emailed me and said, you asked for a 50-minute slot, can you cut it down to 40 minutes? And I said, sure, that's not going to be a problem. I'm going to talk fast. So, it's undergone a few revisions, but this talk is Agile Companies Go P.O.P. And I'll explain a lot more later as what P.O.P means, so you can begin to understand what Agile means. But I first want to start out by giving you a wonderful example of what Agile is not. So I was a senior software engineer for the BBC for a number of years, and I will never forget my first week there, when a gentleman walked up to me with a mug in his hand and he said, hello. I looked at him and said, hello. Who are you? And he said, I'm your boss. And I was very confused, and I turned and I pointed to a gentleman to my right, and I said, that is my team lead. And I pointed to a lady behind me, I said, that is my project manager. And I pointed to another lady behind me, I said, that is my product owner. And that gentleman sitting over there says that he's my boss. The gentleman with the mug laughed and said, I completely understand the situation, I'll talk to you next week. I never saw him again. There were two interesting things about this. One, he was my boss. Two, the other people on our team weren't really certain who we were actually reporting to. The BBC uses Scrum. The BBC is not Agile. That right there should give you a big clue as to what Agile is really about. So I started doing some research, trying to find out what makes companies successful, and I came up with all sorts of conflicting opinions, all sorts of different studies, and then I found this one published in the Harvard Business Review, and this one was fantastic. They studied the trading data of over 20,000 companies for 40 years. They had almost 250,000 years worth of data of these companies, and they started comparing how these companies were doing to the various studies about them, and they discovered something absolutely remarkable. So that coin flip isn't really a coincidental slide there. If I were to take a coin out of my pocket and I were to flip this coin 7 times, and 7 times in a row this coin comes up heads, you're going to say, okay, something's wrong. I lied to you about whether it came up heads, or maybe it's a weighted coin, or maybe it's a double-headed coin. Something's going on. Whereas, if I have all of you in this audience stand up and flip a coin, everyone who gets a tail sits down. Do it again. Everyone who gets a tail, sit down 7 times in a row. Some of you are going to remain standing at the end by the law of probability. Does this mean you're special? Does this mean you're wonderful? So part of what they found out in this Harvard Business Review study was actually 10% of the companies are in the top 10%. Just because you're on top doesn't mean you're good. Just because you're on the bottom doesn't mean that you're bad. So, for example, one of the statistical flaws they found was something called the Texas sharpshooter problem. So this is where you would shoot first, and then you would announce your target afterwards. So many of these studies, they would say, oh, we like this particular methodology, and this company's doing really well, and they use our methodology. But if you shift forward or back just a little bit in time, those companies weren't necessarily doing so well, but they were using the same methodology. And when they went through and corrected for statistical error after statistical error, what they found from many studies is that the apparent superstars that these studies were pulling out were rubbish. Now, they actually did have some valuable information about the things you could actually do to improve your company, but the reality is most of the information coming up in these studies wasn't very good, and it was very frustrating to me, and I was trying to think, how am I going to find out what makes business really work? What am I going to do if all the studies are rubbish? And then I started thinking about chess. So, a long time ago, an ex-partner of mine referred to herself as a chess widow because I played chess so often. And one of the things you discover after a while in playing chess is that between 2 players of equal skill, a player with a bad strategy will beat a player with no strategy, almost every single time. So let's try and pick a good strategy. So here's a bad one. It's called Waterfall. And it turns out the Waterfall plan is actually a very, very good method for delivering things. Hardware. We've known since the 1970s that Waterfall does not particularly work well for software development, even though many companies choose it because it's very predictable. We can understand the steps. We can follow the steps. It's easy. And what winds up happening in the Waterfall scenario is you go to a lot of meetings, you have really big projects, and process is everything. You get hired, and they start beating you into the shape of a process from day one. You are there to conform. You are here. That's what you are in an Agile system. And what do we have for software development? Well, we have Agile, We have Cowboy, we have Waterfall. Cowboy obviously is not what we want. So I'm not really going to go over the Agile Manifesto right now. You can look that up online, you can discuss it later, but I'm going to talk about some of the ramifications and where you start with. So getting back to chess. In chess, the goal of chess is checkmate. And what's the strategy that we follow to achieve our goal? Well, this is the overall plan to achieve checkmate. Your strategy in chess is not to make the other person laugh, it's to win the game. It's to capture the king or force him to resign. The tactics are the individual moves you make to implement that strategy. And what you learn very quickly in chess is that you do not make a move unless it follows your strategic plan, with the exception of a move which clearly advances you to your goal of checkmate. For example, my friend Gary and I played a lot of chess, and there were always very interesting games. He could always see further than I could. When there were tactical complications on the board, he crushed me. He destroyed me in positional analysis. And the games were so fascinating because Gary almost always lost. How could this work? Because Gary was a tactical thinker, and I had a strategy. For those of you who are curious, I played something called a hyper-modern defense with a closed center, and I bored him to death every single game. And that's why he lost, because he just couldn't handle that. So I had a strategy, and it worked. For your business, you have a mission statement. What's a mission statement? It should be short, it should be actionable, and everybody in the company needs to know what it is, even the janitors. If you think the janitors don't impact your productivity, you sit on the toilet and you reach for the toilet paper that is not there. Everybody makes an impact. So what's your mission statement? A great example is Kawasaki on their manufacturing floor. It used to have a 2-word banner hanging over it, which everyone could see. That was their mission statement. It said, beat Yamaha. That's pretty darn clear. Kennedy, this was a great one. Beginning of the 1960s, he said by the end of the decade, we're going to go to the moon. He effectively hung a banner over the entire United States saying, beat Russia. That is a mission statement. So in this case, our goals are mission statement. It's whatever your business is going to try and do, whatever you're going to try and deliver. Your strategy in this case, we're going to talk about an agile company. And the tactics are POP, people, organization, and process. You have this entire continuum of things. It's not about XP, Kanban, whatever. So we're going to start talking about people first, and I only have a 40-minute talk. I can't even begin to cover everything that's going on in any of these sections. But first of all, people are everything in your organization. I'm sure all of us know of people in organizations who actually provide negative value from time to time. This happens. It's very frustrating. And particularly over here in Europe, it's not like the United States where you can fire someone because they have the wrong color shoelaces. But even if you could, they still got that business knowledge. So you don't want to choose the wrong people. But what do people do? They do an unstructured interview. And these are very frustrating because this is your intake of the most important asset the company has, and you're doing it wrong. Interviewers aren't trained in interviewing techniques. Different candidates get asked different questions. And what happens with the candidate? They're sitting there not trying to tell you the true answer, they're trying to tell you the right answer. For example, what's the right answer to, are you a team player? Yeah, it's a dumb question. No, I'm not a team player. I'm going to kick all your tails and take over your jobs, whatever. No, of course. Yes, I'm a team player. What's your weakness?
Too honest.
Yeah, too honest, workaholic, things like that. These are dumb. These don't work. You may as well take half your CVs, throw them on the floor saying, I don't hire unlucky people. It's the same effect. Unstructured interviews, we've known from many, many studies, do not work. They have very little predictive power in actually choosing someone who's going to be successful. You use a structured interview. These actually work extremely well. My voice is going in and out, isn't it, with this microphone?
You gotta keep it close.
Okay, thank you. So a structured interview, the same questions are always asked in the same order of every candidate. There's also something called a semi-structured interview, but I won't go into that now. You focus on the actual skills that are needed, and it turns out we know that when a structured interview is conducted by trained personnel, it has excellent predictive power for whether or not the employee is going to succeed in the company. So it's amazing that very few companies actually use them. So a basic way a structured interview happens is you conduct a job analysis. You figure out what skills are actually required to perform this job, and you wind up creating questions to reflect, something necessary about that skill. So you need a candidate who can handle differences of opinion well and maybe convince others because they have to be persuasive in a difficult environment. So you might ask them a question about, Can you tell me a time when you had an idea for changing something, but everyone else disagreed? How did you approach the situation? And then you go through what's called the STAR technique, which is situation, task, action, and resolution. And you have to go through all those steps. And I'm not going to explain this now because I'm not here to train you on structured interview. I added another R called reflection, where you think back to the task and you wonder, what worked, what didn't work, can you tell me a little bit more, how you would have changed it, etc. And then you and the other interviewers, because you want more than one for this technique, immediately step out of the room after the interview is over, hand the candidate off to HR, and you sit down on the spot so you don't forget, and say, for this skill, how did they do? I think they scored a 2. No, I think they scored a 4. Why? And then you discuss back and forth until you have a set of numbers. What happens at the end of this? For every one of your candidates, you're going to have an objective set of criteria of what you think the candidate's able to do, comparable against all of your candidates, against the actual skills that you need, not whether or not they can answer the team player question. Now, there are some things about the structured interview. They're tough to do. They're stressful for many candidates. It's hard to lie on a structured interview because of the way you dig through information and ask questions again. They're not subjective, which is good. And there's different types of questions, situational, historical, and technical, and you need to do a lot of practice in a structured interview before you actually give one, so that you can understand how they function. They work very, very well. There's more I can say about people, but again, 40 minutes. So we're going to talk about organization. And I mentioned BBC and about how they practice Scrum, but they're nothing close to Agile. So let's talk about Agile for a moment, what it looks like. So some of you might remember back in 2010 when the Icelandic, the Bjork volcano erupted and imposed a no-fly zone over Europe. This was a disaster for the hotel industry for obvious reasons. People are getting stranded all over the place. And Booking.com did a lot of, this is not a pitch for them, by the way, I don't work. Booking.com did a lot of interesting things about this. And one of the things they did is they immediately went out and they hired a whole bunch of call center staff. And we didn't have time to train them, but they would train them on a specific type of question to answer, and then they would sit them down in rows behind the phones with experienced call center staff behind them to work through this crisis of the volcano. And in just a couple of days, they had tons of call center staff focused on specific tasks. So anyone who called got a human being. That was a fast response. That was an agile response, and they got a lot of kudos for it. A lot of people really appreciated what Booking.com did. They did a whole bunch of other things, but I'm not allowed to say. So, what is an agile organization? What do they actually look like? Agile organization, you're moving fast. You're constantly doing things. You can't be asking for permission every single second about every single thing, so everyone winds up being an owner. They have to take ownership for what they do. Ownership means responsibility. Responsibility requires authority. You have the authority to make decisions. And what do you use to make decisions? Information. Much of Agile is focused on delivering stuff, but informed stuff. You must have information, not opinions. So Agile organizations, one of the things they do is they favor small projects over large projects. I mean, you hear about sprints and things like that. Information is much more valued over opinion. A great example is A/B testing. That gets you a lot of real-world information rather than a guess as to how your customers actually behave. And anytime you're doing this, there's actually a lot of risk in Agile, so you're constantly focusing on what that risk is and how you minimize it and how you maximize the reward. So these are just a few of the things you're going to see about the overall organization. So, information. When we're trying to minimize the risk that this constant production of stuff implies without these large overhead processes, you need a lot of information all the time. The first thing you do from the software development side is you test everything. You make sure your stuff works. If you're going to strap that rocket to my bum, I want to make sure it explodes before you strap it there. That's important. So you're finding out what happens before you deploy your software. After you deploy, you monitor everything, because you want to know what happens during this deployment process while the software is running. And you're not just monitoring, is the box up? You're not just monitoring what's the CPU load. You need to think a little bit more beyond that. You need to think about the business needs. For example, maybe it's critical that you have an email newsletter that people are constantly signing up for. Write a monitor for that, so you can see the trend over time, and all of a sudden people stop signing up for your email newsletter. That's something useful to know. But quite often you wouldn't know that because people don't think about monitoring their business needs. They think about monitoring their technical needs, but you can do both. This is so much more than just, is the box up? Is the box responding? So testing tells what happens before you deploy your software. Monitor tells you what happens while you're running your software. Logging tells you what happens after everything failed and you realize, oops. So you need to log things carefully. So this is the full cycle of information for just the software side. This gives you an idea of how information is accumulated. It's complicated, it's difficult, and there's a lot I can say about logging, which I won't go into right now. I'm writing some code right now which has so much logging, it's beginning to obscure the business logic, and I've got to figure out a better way of handling that problem. But it's really important, and now, unlike the previous system, if something goes wrong in my system, I can find out exactly why. I can point to the line numbers of the data files which are causing the problems. I can say exactly why they're caused in ways that we were never able to do before. And now it's trivial for us to find a bug in our system. And you want to constantly challenge assumptions. This is, again, another important thing about an agile organization is they say, what things have we assumed to be true that we don't necessarily know to be true? So you may know about Galileo's famous thought experiment with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Everyone knew that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects, and he talked about the idea of dropping a heavier and lighter object off the Tower of Pisa connected to streams and see which one jerked first. As far as I know, he never actually did that, but he challenged what everyone simply knew. So here's some way to challenge your thinking, for example. So let's say you deploy your software, and you have a major bug in your software, something you forgot to test. And you've been monitoring your business needs, not just your technical ones, and you discover your sales have now spiked 20% as a direct result of that bug. Is that a bug?
It's a feature.
Yes, it is a feature. You actually don't care about what your software does. You care about what your customers do. A lot of people keep forgetting this when we're talking about Agile. It's all about technical, 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 technical. I'm sorry, many of us are selling things. We're delivering products. That's who you're actually thinking about. So this is an assumption you need to think about. Is a bug if it improves your end goal? So last thing I'll say about organization. You desperately need to go out and download the Valve Employee Software Manual. So back in the days of the Industrial Revolution, when we started breaking up the feudal period, you had the lords, you had the peasants who worked on the farms to give part of their food to the lords, and the lords had other lords above them. You had this nice feudal hierarchy, which kind of looks like a corporation. So we had the Industrial Revolution, we broke up the feudal system to replace it with a capitalist feudal system, which may be a good or bad thing, just depends upon how you view it. And Valve says, no. Valve employees don't have job titles. Download their employee handbook. You will believe that this is a first-year business student who took a creative writing class. But it is really fascinating. They don't have job titles. Every desk has wheels. Your first day on the job, you don't get assigned a task. You're supposed to walk around and talk to people and find out what you want to do. Oh, that sounds cool. So you unplug everything on your desk and you wheel it over to the project and you start working. You don't have a job title. Some employees have job titles on their business cards because people outside freak out if they don't have a job title on the card, because that's how you have to interface with the outside world. Inside, you decide, you know what, this team actually kind of sucks. So you go and you talk to another team, what are you doing? That sounds cool, can I help? Sure, great. So you go back to your desk, you unplug everything, and you wheel your desk over to the new team. There are no bosses. It doesn't work like that in the company. They are a radical revisioning of how this works. By the way, Valve software has greater profitability per employee than Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. They're doing really, really well. And they've completely destroyed the feudal structure that we tend to have in corporations. So that's the last I'll say about organizations. We'll go ahead and move on to, oh, they're doing better than I thought. We're going to move on to process. This is what most people think about when we talk about Agile. This is down to the nitty-gritty, what happens on a daily basis. I've been talking about the mindset. You know, how do you get the right people in? How does the organization look? How do people think? But the process, the large day-to-day, what happens? This is, for me, the most painful slide I have ever put up in a conference, and it hurts me every single time I put it up there, but it's true. Large projects fail, and the space shuttle is one of the most brilliant examples of a vanity project, which was a complete failure. It absolutely did not meet its original design goals. People died who did not have to die. Billions and billions and billions of dollars were flushed down that behemoth, all for the pride of the United States of America. When there's so many better things they could have done, it was a large project. And because of the politics, because of so many other things around it, because of Air Force requirements, it failed dramatically. And they're emblematic of what's going on with large projects. So we know large projects fail. We've seen this over and over again through so many studies. So you don't do large projects. There are some caveats to this. Obviously, Valve Software, emblematic of who Agile is, they do very large projects. But instead, you break them down into small projects. You got a year-long project? Yeah, it's going to take me a year to deliver this great thing, which is going to revolutionize the company. No, sorry, fail, go away. If instead you come back and say, I have this vision of something which might take a year to build, but I know we can't absorb all of that risk at once because that's very dangerous and we know large projects are going to fail. So you break it down into a series of small projects. Each of those small projects needs to independently add some sort of value to your company. What happens if you take this approach? It requires rethinking how your software processes work. It requires analyzing things in a different way than huge monolithic architecture, which is going to take years to implement. It's breaking things down small, piece by piece, each of which independently has value, so that halfway through that year, if you say we can't do the large project, you didn't fail. You've had a bunch of small projects succeed and independently add value to your company. You have embraced change instead of worrying about failure. It's just a different way of building products, and it works very wonderfully. I've seen this in action repeatedly. So here's another thing about how the actual process works. And this subroutine was very frustrating to me. This was written by a brand new employee, fresh out of university. And I was doing a code review, and I came across the subroutine. And it was problematic for me because thingies would always contain exactly one element. Why is this person iterating over a one-element array? And I thought about it. I could understand his future-proofing logic about this particular thing, and I didn't say anything. Because he's a brand new employee, fresh out of university, what am I looking for when I do a code review for them? Does the code work? Is it well encapsulated? Does it have tests? Bam, you pass. I said nothing about that, even though it bugged me. And had he been a senior developer, I would have gone and talked to them and said, why did you do this? Meanwhile, our boss, unbeknownst to me, was also doing a code review. And he sent this employee an email that he copied to a number of other people and said, what on earth were you thinking? I quietly contacted my boss and said, A, you didn't need to publicly humiliate him like that. And B, what on earth were you thinking? He's a brand new employee. You don't need to humiliate him, and the code works. It's a little strange. It's not how we would do it. A couple of hours later, my boss sent me an email that shocked me. I cut and pasted this email into Word just to see. It came out to 5 pages of what my boss looks for in a brand new employee's code. 5 lines of code generated a 5-page code review. What was fascinating is this guy was brilliant. I could look at any of these individual points, and there was not a single individual point that I could take exception to. I couldn't say, not this, not this, not this, because they all made sense, but 5 pages worth? What could he have been doing with his time? So to give you another aspect of this same problem, of this non-agile mindset, one company I worked for, this was their 21-step workflow process for everything. You find a bug, it goes through there. Exceptions were allowed for a hot fix. But time and time again, we would have a meeting, and the manager would come in and he'd say, where are you in this workflow process? Oh, we're about to deploy. So why does your workflow process still say in the review OK step? Oh, yeah, we haven't been doing that. We've just been getting our job done. And this happened meeting after meeting after meeting. The boss would come in, he'd be upset with the employees because they're not updating their ticketing system to reflect which of these 21 bloody steps. And really, when you talk to him, there wasn't a single step you could actually argue about. All of them made sense in the proper context. So what does that mean? Well, it's not agile. So let's instead stop thinking about workflow from the manager perspective. And let's think about it from the developer perspective for a moment. Everybody laughs whenever I put up this slide. This slide is not a joke. This is the Platonic ideal of what you are striving for. It does not mean that you are ever going to get there. It means when you are thinking about how you deliver software, this is what you're looking for. All those processes, all of those steps, those are important, but they're not what you're delivering. You do not deliver a process, you deliver a product. So how can you keep your eye on the ball and focus on that? So workflow from the Agile perspective, you gotta have some compromise. That 21-step process system was a joke, and everyone laughed at it, and everyone ignored it, and they still got stuff done. So you're developing products, you're not developing processes. Well, unless you're like an Agile consultant or something like that. And you have constant testing, logging, and monitoring throughout the entire system. Because adopting this idea of how you're going to develop stuff, you're taking a lot of risk on. Because you don't have all of these well-documented steps every step of the way. You don't have this ISO 9001 process or whatever where you've got your coffee maker labeled, coffee maker, so you know what it is. So you need to have a lot of information every step of the way so you can find out what actually happened. You're not worried about the processes, you're worried about what happens with your code, what happens with your product before, during, and after deployment. That's what you're really focused on. Don't get your eye off the ball. So to give you an example, a specific example of how this works in practice, and I've done this with companies, this is fabulous. So you've probably heard about continuous integration. That's kind of old school today. The Agile methodologies, particularly, you hear about DevOps quite a bit. Jeff gave a talk about DevOps earlier. A lot of what we do now is continuous deployment, and that's really tough to pull off, particularly if you don't have the right Agile mindset. So what happens with continuous deployment is, so like for myself, I remember one time I saw a bug in some code, I talked to my boss, and I said, this looks dodgy. He said, fix it. So I fixed it, I pushed it live 2 hours later, and that was it. That was the entire process. There's a lot of infrastructure necessary in order to get continuous deployment to work correctly, and something like this doesn't work with the Waterfall methodology at all. But think about it. You have companies that they think they're Agile, and they're releasing their code every 2 weeks. I write a lot of code. And in fact, I've had some complaints in my current contract because they say I'm so productive, it's taking them too long to do their code review. Okay, fine. But I produce a lot of code. So if you're going to release my code on a 2-week basis, all of a sudden you're looking at a code review of possibly a few thousand lines. Or if I can keep releasing my code every few minutes or hours when I'm checking in, if something breaks, do you want to do a 5,000-line code review or a 10-line code review? Well, all of a sudden you're changing the risk-reward ratio. The risk is, it's more likely if you keep pushing fast to production that you're going to break something. But it's much more likely that you're going to find out what the problem is now. And you can respond to changes so quickly. And once you get a good continuous deployment system, you check your code into the release branch, it's out there, it's live. And it works really well. And it works for some of the largest e-commerce companies on the planet. Company after company is switching to continuous deployment because when it's managed correctly and you understand what the risks are and you learn how to minimize those risks, you understand what the rewards are, you learn how to maximize those rewards, you can get stuff done so fast it is not even funny. So when you're thinking about Agile, everyone thinks about Agile project management, XP, Scrum, Kanban, Crystal, stuff like that. I don't care. To me, that is actually one of the least interesting things about Agile. If you want to come up with a different methodology and you understand how it works and you understand the continuous feedback loop you have in your system to keep the information flowing so people know what's going on, I don't care what you call it. Companies talk about, oh, we use a modified Scrum. Well, yeah, so did the BBC. This is not Agile. It is an important component of Agile, and you need to understand how they work. But it is, to me, the least interesting aspect because Agile's not about developing software. It's about a mindset. So how do you become Agile? Now, this is the interesting bit. When you're looking at your people, organization, and process, what happens is you've got a big project to become Agile, but you don't do big projects because you're now Agile. So you do it one step at a time. You pick the high-value steps in your company that you're going to start gradually shifting over to an Agile methodology. And what do? The hiring part, that's difficult. Actually, understanding how to hire good employees takes a little bit of training, but this is the easy bit. But it's actually hard to actually have space. Maybe you don't have the budget to have the new employees. Maybe your old employees are being thoughtless and not going away. So theoretically, it's easy, but it's not easy to actually get the people there. So what you do, you talk to your employees. What hurts? You know, what's difficult? And so, for example, last contract I had, one of the pain points they talked to me about, I said, I am tired of going to this person every single time I have to work on a different section of the code to get permission to check out that section of the Git repository. Open it up to everybody. Just let me check it out. But if you do that, people will change things. Yes, they will. And so they opened it up, and everybody did it, and all of a sudden, one of our biggest pain points went away. So you go around, you talk to your employees, find out what their pain points are, and after a while, common themes will start to emerge, and it'll be obvious targets for figuring out how to streamline the process, so the process fits the people, rather than trying to fit the people to the process. You keep assessing your risk and reward for each of these various things, and this is a balance, which is often very difficult, but at this point, you've got your testing, you've got your monitoring, you've got your logging, you've got the information necessary to minimize a lot of your risk. And remember the Pareto rule, that 80% of your benefits tend to come from 20% of your actions. And it really is true. The vast majority, thank you, the vast majority of your benefits will come fairly quickly, and then you have long-term to decide other things that you want to take care of. And if I seem vague about a lot of this, it's because this really is a mindset. It's not a turnkey solution for how you're going to implement it, because it's going to be different for different companies. And what happens once you become agile? Never forget your goal. That's that business statement I was talking about at the beginning, whether it's beat Yamaha, beat Russia, whatever you want to do, sell more pigeons than everyone else, it doesn't matter. And remember about that goal, if you decide you can throw away all your computers and deliver your messages by carrier pigeon, well, you know, obviously that's not going to happen, but if that would make you more money, well, isn't that what your goal is? For many of you, not all of you, obviously. So always keep that goal in mind. Always question what your processes are. You don't stop, because this is agile. You're always saying, can we do better? Can we hit that Platonic Ideal of start task, finish task? Because you're developing products. And again, mindset, not a process. So the Agile Manifesto is something that I have a few issues with. You know, it values people over process. Yeah, that's important. Software over documentation, that's actually an implementation detail. So when Toyota developed Kanban, they did that for developing cars, not computer programs. Completely different. They're very agile about developing cars. That's not software. In fact, ironically, Toyota's known for having a very waterfall approach to their software development. But it's not about software. And customer collaboration over negotiation, there's all sorts of issues involved in that, which I won't even go into right now. It's a great idea in theory. You try and negotiate with the government regarding this for a government contract, you're going to have problems. And that's another implementation detail that I don't like. But it is about embracing change over plans. So I actually like this. I rewrote the Agile Manifesto for what I think Agile actually is. You want to value products over process. Never forget your end goal. You're pushing stuff out the door. You want to deliver. That's what you are there for. You are not there to fill out your TPS reports or to sit in meetings. You're there to develop stuff. Information is always valued over opinion. If you have an opportunity, if you have a website and you have actionable goals and conversion funnels, my God, put up A/B testing. You'll get so much information over what your customers do, because you don't care what your software does if your customers don't cooperate. You get information, not speculation, not guesses. Information is very important to risk management for agile development. It's courage over fear. You don't want a risk-averse company. You don't want people sitting around timidly, but that might break something. They're called sysadmins. Sorry, guys and gals. And finally, it is about embracing change over plans. We have a very fast-paced world. Information flows quickly. People move quickly. So it's change over plans. Follow that. This is what the Agile mindset is. This is how, in my opinion, the Agile Manifesto should actually read. And it takes a while to get there. But once you understand people, organization, and process working together in a new mindset, then you can really do magnificent things for the company. Thank you. And I have a few minutes. Yay, I fit their time scale. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. Where do you draw the line of when a company is allowed to go agile? For example, Mozilla went agile, and we are up to Firefox version 69, I
Okay, the question is, where would you draw the line at Agile? Because some companies are going to go Agile, and it's not going to work out well for them.
No. It works well for Mozilla. It doesn't work for everybody else.
Okay. In that particular case, I really can't comment on it because I don't know enough about it. But in some cases, for example, if you're developing software for anything which causes harm, economic harm is one case, or specifically personal harm, like you're developing medical imaging technology. I don't want you using Agile for that. I'm sorry. I want you to have a well-documented, carefully thought-out process with strong QA to make sure you don't kill people. So anything which has a strong possibility of causing harm, that is one of the first red flags for me to say maybe more casual Agile atmosphere is not appropriate for a situation like that. So in the case of Mozilla, I can't say. Maybe they lost the perspective of their customers. Kind of like, oh, Google Chrome. That was such a brilliant idea. Now the thing's a pig on my system. So harm. That is the first thing I would always say to that. Anything which could leak customer information, anything which could, maybe double charge their credit card, anything which would cause them personal, serious, particularly if it's irreversible harm that you can't recover from, those are the cases where you start saying maybe Agile's not good. Space Shuttle software is a great example. Space Shuttle software, brilliant. If you ever read about NASA development methodology, you would hate it. I would never want to work there, but I would never change their system because it works. Yes?
As an add-on to that, I disagree because even there's a part of ISO 9001 for
Yes.
medical software, and they show you how to do Agile but still have good quality. So it's even standardized nowadays.
Okay. I would like to read about that, actually. Thank you. So yeah, he was commenting that as part of ISO 9001, they're talking about developing medical software where they can do it in an agile process and they have standards for doing this in a safe way. I would like to read more about that. Yes?
Would you say that this way of continuous development would make developers burn out faster?
It's not been my personal experience. I do find that it can cause some burnout if this development's not managed well. Many times what happens is the companies say, we're going to be agile, but instead they're being cowboy. It's like, how fast can we push stuff out the door? We're not going to take the time to manage our technical debt effectively. We're not going to have retrospectives to figure out what we did or didn't do. Instead, it's just crack the whip, keep delivering stuff. If it is not managed effectively, and if you don't have a sense of, a clear goal, then yes, it is. I think it can cause burnout there. I've seen it in a couple of companies. There's one company in Portland, Oregon, as a matter of fact, which has this issue, and they're known as a place where Perl programmers go to die. Any other questions? Yes?
One more question regarding continuous development. Does it
Continuous deployment?
continuous development
Okay.
does it always imply that we shorten the time between the development and the deployment in production?
You're asking, does it always, are you asking for a continuous development? Does this imply that it always shortens the time between development and deployment?
Yeah.
This is an important concept often advocated by Agile because the idea is you want constant feedback. So when they say customer collaboration over negotiation, the idea is you're constantly working with your customer to get this information in immediately. And to a certain extent, I don't necessarily view the customer as being the product owner, like they would say for some companies, but it's a real person out using your product. How can you monitor their behavior to find out if they're behaving in the way that you would like them to do? Such as signing up for your newsletter, clicking on that link, buying your products, whatever. So yes, you want that quick, rapid feedback because I know of one company which was king in their field, and they release new versions of their software every 3 months, whereas their competitor, the small fry, was doing this several times an hour, and they kept gradually iterating and getting better and better and better. And this king of the field is now a distant second because it took so long between their deployment process and getting feedback from their customers that it was very hard for them to find out what worked and what didn't. And this other company, as soon as they saw something didn't work, bam, stop. They didn't have to wait another 3 months for a new delivery cycle. So yes, you want that rapid delivery. Anything else? Sal?
How would you address workplaces where they have rules to consider like security considerations and audits like PCI DSS and stuff like that? still being agile and all that?
In a situation like that, those are very hypothetical. Without actually seeing what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, it's tough to say. So one company I was with, I carried my RSA key with me everywhere, that little, or is it called RSA? I don't remember, where the number shifted all the time, and of course it was actually compromised and wasn't as secure as we thought. But I carried that with me all the time. We had all of our VPNs set up, but everything was geared towards the idea of trying to meet the minimum mandates that we had to have in order to legally meet our obligations and still let people just focus on working. So everything is, just always remember, we have products that we're pushing out, not processes, but some processes are always mandatory. Like one time I worked at a company where we had a legal deadline that we had to implement some cost accounting software, or we were facing big fines. We say we don't want deadlines in Agile, but we had to do it. Otherwise, we were going to lose a lot of money. So sometimes you're just stuck. Thank you very much, folks. Yeah, I was doing that with one of my previous
and also quite a few vendors.
If anyone, by the way, is curious about continuous deployment, Mike from P.O.P Systems and I are going to be sitting down and chatting about it in a little while. So if anyone wants to join us and get a better idea of what continuous deployment actually does in the real world, this would be a great opportunity right now.
terms of the spell of like idea, but it's more than